So, are you thinking about bringing your brand, your company, your service, your magic into the US market? What if there was one simple legal step that you could take to protect your brand and save you from costly headaches later on down the road? This is Daisy. My name's Samantha. I'm a small business and trademark attorney that started out actually helping Lebanese brands expand outside of Lebanon. Today, I'm going to help you understand if US trademark registration fits your business expansion plans. In this video, you're going to learn a couple key differences in US trademark law that are going to make a big difference in how you set up your next moves when you're entering the US, what makes registration a game changer in the United States, and hear a couple hypothetical stories about businesses expanding into the US, including an interesting one that I made up in my head from Pirenópolis, Brazil. So we're going to go there after a couple minutes and check that out. Are you ready? Let's dive in. By the way, if you are planning to expand into the US, I do have a trademark registration checklist for non-US businesses that will guide you step by step through some of the common pitfalls that folks run into because the system here is different than everywhere else in the world. So you can check that out. The link is down in the description below. In most of the world, the first person to actually register their trademark with that equivalent of the trademark registration office is normally the one that they're like, okay, well, you registered first, so this brand, this identifier of your products or services is going to be yours. In the US, it's not actually that. It is the first person to use it. But the first person to file has the presumption that they're the ones who, have exclusive rights over that brand name. Problem is, if you're not the first to file, defending the fact that you were the first to use it can become a massively expensive litigation. I'm talking starting $45,000 on the average. Whereas if you just file before you even enter the US market, which by the way, you can do, you've got about 2 years, depending on when you're watching this video, with some extensions and everything, from the time you file the application to prove that you're actually using the brand. So if this is something on the horizon for you, why not go ahead and reserve your space now? That way, when your brand does actually enter the US, you're front of the line for absolutely everything for 10% of the price of the medium litigation level, right, of fighting something out later on down the road. It becomes really easy for companies that are coming from countries who did wildly well, who understood, I just need to file, and then I'm good. If an American brand or even another non-US brand was in the market under the same name as you before you were, they can start a litigation fight that can drag on for years, that can cost you all the money that you had set aside to actually create this big expansion into a market with a lot of disposable income, right? For a lot of companies, this can be a big money maker when they actually get into it, knowing that they have to invest quite a lot to set up production, import, hire people, get the right business set up, prepare for American taxes as non-US residents, because that's a bit of a mess. Knowing that you're coming into a first-to-use system rather than a first-to-file system, and knowing that you can file up to 2 years before you're actually using the brand, both of those things and making those filings early is going to save you a ton of money later on down the road. Okay, so at this point, if you're thinking about bringing your brand into the US, bringing your company into the US, you may have already heard that registering a trademark will give you exclusive rights to sell your thing under your name in the US market. What you may not have heard is how much easier it becomes to shut down copycats and counterfeits once you actually have that registration in the US. That includes shutting down anyone who makes a copy of your product on Amazon. Amazon will pretty much ignore you if you tell them that's not my product unless you can show them a trademark or a copyright. American intellectual property registration becomes crucial if you're entering the physical goods market. Likewise, Google, Meta respond much quicker to taking down counterfeit accounts pretending to offer your services or any of the platforms that are used for educational, coaching, this kind of stuff, if you can show them, no, I'm the one that's supposed to be selling this and that's not me. Otherwise, you get into a back and forth of providing evidence. The benefit of registration here is that it becomes the default assumption that you are the brand owner, that you are the company owner, without having to prove anything otherwise. It also means that there's an understanding. I literally heard a podcast host. She said when people apply to be guests on her podcast or ask for sponsorships on her podcast, simply seeing the little circle R, which means you actually have the registered mark at this point, not just an application. TM and SM mean nothing. Anybody can use them. If you want more details on it, there's a video about that over here that you can go watch. But she actually gives a lot more weight and credibility to the product or service that's pitching her when she sees that symbol. If she has that opinion, other people probably do too. And what can it hurt to make sure that you're now the exclusive person selling this thing and with a little bit of oomph behind you? Can't be worse, right? So I want to take you actually out of this office into a kind of a made-up example on my last trip to Pirenópolis in Goiás, Brazil, trying to imagine what importing a unique product that's very special to that city would be like with and without US trademark protection. So let's head over there real quick. So I'm here in a former gold rush town where the main things that they really deal with now as far as their economy are tourism and the Pedra do Pirenópolis, the stone that's used on most of the sidewalks here. Before the gold rush town, there were a bunch of indigenous groups here that were pushed out when Western Europeans, primarily Portuguese and Spanish, arrived here and were chasing gold in the rivers. And they called it Pirenópolis because the idea is we think that it reminded them of the Pyrenees mountains around where they were coming from. But back to that stone. If you as a business decided that the Pedra do Pirenópolis, this stone, was something that you wanted to export from this area, maybe into the US market, to become the new fancy things that the Americans put all over their backyards surrounded by their pools or whatever, what you're really selling when you're selling the stone is the location, the story, for sure, this is all branding and marketing, but you're selling the quality and the reputation of that stone. So imagine you go through all the effort to work with what's the place they dig the stone out of? You go and work with a quarry and you get all of the stone chopped up and start moving this heavy material into the US, you've built your marketing brand, everything's going great. And then somebody says, wow, that's a funny name, Pedra do Pirenópolis, and they open a company that's selling Pedra do Pirenópolis, but it's not this stone. Suddenly, all the work that you've done to brand yourself, to brand the product that you're importing into the US as Pedra do Pirenópolis, can be completely overrun by someone who just said, that's a funny name, I'm going to use that. Or what you can do as an international company trying to bring your product or service into the US is you can say, this is my reputation, this is the brand I'm building in a country that doesn't understand or know exactly what it is that I'm selling, and you protect the name, which protects the reputation and the quality associated with your product. So that way when somebody else comes in and says, oh, I'm also selling Pedra do Pirenópolis, they can be like, no, 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 you can shut the brand name down, and you make sure your customers aren't buying a lower quality product, even though yours is the best one and you've done all the work to import it into this country that has plenty of money to go around to buy things with their disposable income, right? So the idea is that you want to make sure you're protecting your investment and all the effort that you've created from quarry to the shelf at Lowe's and the big box store in the US. Yeah, that's it, I guess. Okay, it's the end of the rainy season here in Brazil, so let me close the window real quick. So some businesses have international expansion built into their business plan from the beginning. It becomes a lot easier to think of yourself as a global brand when that's on the first step. Others just realize that maybe there's another market somewhere that makes sense for them, right? So they explore it later on. But the question really is a US trademark registration worth the investment? When I think about this, I think about one of my former clients, which was a car washing app. Oh, sorry, it's rainy season and the end of rainy season in Brazil. And it looks like there's a storm coming, so let's close that window. So one of my former clients was a car washing app created by two Beiruti guys who hired a bunch of college kids. Hi, Daisy. You want to say hi? Yes. Who hired a bunch of college kids to go clean cars essentially at your house, at your office. And they had it in their minds from the beginning that they were always going to expand quite quickly to Doha and Dubai. You want to come down? Say bye. That was good. You didn't show everybody your butt? Good. Nice. And they sought venture capital funding, angel funding, investments. They did seed rounds, all of this, to help them make sure they could expand quickly into those markets. But what needed to be done, if the US would have been on that expansion list, is making sure that the brand that they had already built up in Lebanon, in Doha, before it went on to Dubai, and if they would have ever expanded into the US, was making sure that there wasn't already a company in the US operating under a similar name. The name of this company was in English, so that wouldn't have been a far stretch. If they would have entered the US market exactly as they were without doing that research, They could have risked somebody becoming a copycat later on and then again having to get into that big litigation fight that cost you $45,000. Maybe somebody did already exist and they would have been stepping on toes and they would have walked into the US, certainly not making money or even looking at just the investment costs. They would have walked into the US with a judgment ready that they had to pay just for stepping foot into the country if the other company had the right lawyer. So, provided on their expansion plans, the US was going to be after Dubai. If there was already a company in the US operating under the same name, this original Lebanese company would have walked into the US waiting for litigation to happen, waiting for someone to send them a nasty lawyer letter demanding of profits that they had made, despite the fact that they had just invested a ton of money in trying to get into this market. So they're starting out as a loss and have to rebrand and create essentially a second marketing campaign stateside, which is a headache and a nightmare and could have been avoided for simply just making sure that the mark was available in the US and that it was registered before they arrived or right after they arrived, depending on how your timeline works. It would have just been much easier for them. So for me, this is a really clear thing of like the US registration makes sense if a US expansion is on your list. What I tell all my small business owners that are already in the US and starting companies from within the US is that there is always budget to consider. Right? If you have an unlimited budget, I would recommend registering everything that's possibly associated with your brand to make sure you're fully protected. However, if budget's a concern and you know you need to spend more money on marketing, more money on hiring the right people, more money on getting your logistics set up, totally fine. We start out with, at least the way that we do trademarks, is we make sure we're registering the first brand that when people say, hey, how do I buy that guy's service or product? I need this thing. What somebody verbally refers to you as, whether that be your name, your tagline, the business name, the signature product or service that you have, if it has a special name, that's the first thing we register. And then we go down the list from there. If you're an app, suddenly a logo becomes very important. But if you're not, then we're not super concerned about logos because that's not how people are identifying you at first. That's lower on our priority list to make sure that we're balancing your budget with your desire to enter the US market. Also, if you're just kind of trying this out and you don't know if you want to stay in the US market for many reasons that are fairly apparent to folks right now, then there is a way to do this that, because it is a first to use system, that can make things cheaper. At least making sure and getting what we call a trademark temperature check, which is searching all the non-public databases and getting kind of a risk assessment of the marks that you would be bringing into the US with your business, with your brand, those things you would be known by, and giving you kind of a red light, yellow light, green light thing. And then you can choose from there whether it makes sense to rebrand before you enter, whether in love with this name and you've built so much strength on it outside of the US that you're like, no, we absolutely have to register. You can make that decision then. And that certainly comes at a much lower price point than full out registering everything or even just registering your primary stuff. So that being said, we're always very aware of what your budget is and what your goals are with how you're trying to enter the US market, how long you're trying to stay there, and making sure that you're able to choose your path based on budget and risk assessment in a way that makes sense and feels good to you. So download the US trademark checklist and let me know if you've got any questions. You can comment below or reach out. I'm here to help. Reaching out is probably faster than commenting below though, if I'm being completely honest. If this was helpful, please like, subscribe, tap all the buttons, and share it with anyone who might be bringing a business into the US or folks who help bring businesses into the US. We're here to help, always.